So today we will discuss neurobiological mechanisms of decision making, and we will focus on emotional aspects of decision making. To start this lecture, I would like to present you a few interesting studies with quite surprising results. So imagine that you have to hold a pencil in your teeth. Do you think that this manipulation can change your evaluation of funny cartoons? An interesting study shows that indeed this manipulation can affect your emotional evaluation of cartoons. In this study, participants participated in 3 different conditions. In one condition, they had to keep a pen in their teeth. In another condition, they had to keep a pen in their lips. And in a third condition, they simply kept the pen in their hand. Surprisingly, this simple manipulation changed the ratings of funniness of cartoons. As you see here in this table, they found cartoons to be the funniest when they kept their pen in their teeth, and they found the cartoons as the least funny when they kept the pencil or the pen in their lips. So how can we explain this strange result? Perhaps because when we keep this pen in our teeth, it evokes an artificial smile on our face. And this smile changes our ratings of funniness of objects. So let's make a look to another example. Imagine that you are exposed to different photos of neutral faces, faces with neutral expressions. But shortly before these faces, another face is presented. It is presented only for 16 milliseconds, very briefly. So this presentation is so fast that you are unable to see this first face. Some of these faces that are presented for a very short period of time, they have angry expression. Some are neutral, and some actually have happy expressions. So this procedure is called masking procedure. So these faces with emotional expressions are presented so fast and they are masked by the next neutral mask that you are unable to recognize these faces. So we present these emotional expressions subliminally, subconsciously. Do you think that this brief, very fast presentation of emotional expressions can modulate your consumption behavior? So in this study, subjects, after the subliminal exposure to emotional expressions, were asked to put as much drink as they wish to a glass and next to consume as much as they wish of this drink. So result shows that people put to the glass more of this drink after the subliminal subconscious exposure to happy faces than to neutral faces, and they put the least amount of drink if they were subliminally, subconsciously exposed to angry faces. And they also consumed more of this drink if they were exposed to happy faces subliminally, subconsciously. So this interesting result shows that our consumption can be modulated by unconscious presentation of emotional stimuli. Let's move to more economic situations. So, for example, our economic decisions are affected by so-called temporal discounting. Temporal discounting is our feature that basically indicates that we prefer immediate rewards to the delayed rewards. We like to get money immediately. We do not like when money are delayed in time. So, for example, our preference for immediate rewards is used by lotteries. When people win substantial amount of money in lotteries, they quite often get an offer. They can select between the half of the total sum immediately, but get it next day, or they actually can get the total sum they win. But this sum will be presented them in portions, and quite often these portions will be distributed along different period of time. So many people prefer to get money immediately and only half of the money in this situation. And they actually do not like to get the total sum, but delay it in time. This our aspect of decision making can be characterized by the individual discount parameter called K. So normally we can test this parameter by offering people different choices. They can, for example, select between a smaller sum but tomorrow and a larger sum but in a long period of time, for example, in a few days. So with this procedure, we can test temporal discounting parameter of each subject. Do you think that our temporal discounting parameter can be modulated by the photos of sexy females? And this interesting study shows that pretty women, photos of pretty females can substantially modulate our preference for immediate rewards. As you see here, the presentation of photos of opposite sex faces increase temporal discounting parameter. So people start to be more impatient. Especially you see that this effect is pronounced for males. So even the fundamental aspect of our financial decision making, the temporal discounting parameter, is modulated by the presentation of pretty opposite sex faces. And let's now move to even more relevant example, relevant for economics. Do you think that the stock market return can be affected by the weather? This interesting study shows that sunshine is highly correlated with the daily stock returns. So this study investigated 26 leading stock exchanges, and it found that stock return is affected by the weather. How can we explain this strange result? Perhaps because investors and brokers are affected by the weather. Their mood is affected by weather. So, and mood, emotional status, can change financial decisions. So to understand all of these strange results, we have to perhaps assume that emotions contribute to our decision making. So let's try to understand the neuronal mechanisms of emotions and also how emotions can sometimes promote, make beneficial decisions, and sometimes perhaps lead to quite disadvantageous decisions. So you already know this photo, and in this photo you can easily recognize a dog at the center of the screen. So cognitive psychology, cognitive neuroscience spend a lot of time to understand how this very strange, noisy pattern is decoded by our brain and how the image, internal representation of the dog is produced by our neuronal populations. But here we face a kind of an abstract shape, an abstract dog, but there is no abstract dog in real life. There is the dog and evoke emotions. For example, if this is a dog of our son or this is a dog of our daughter, it can trigger strong positive emotions. Sometimes the dog can trigger also extreme sadness. So in addition to the cognitive processing of information, we also extract certain emotional information. So there are two sorts of information encoded in the visual objects or in other objects. The cognitive information regarding the shape, for example, of the object, and emotional information related to the attached emotional values of this object. So let's try to understand how do we process, how do we extract emotional information from the outside world. Some, of course, stimuli have innate emotional meanings. So we shouldn't learn that this stimulus is emotional. Of course, when we're attacked by an aggressive animal, so we automatically react to this situation. So we have an innate mechanism to extract emotional meanings of certain situation. In addition, of course, we have to learn quite often which situations, which objects have emotional meanings. So in our brain we have two basically systems, or two emotional interacting systems. One system is dedicated to the automatic reaction to innate emotional stimuli, and second one is dedicated to learning of emotional meanings. And we will see today that especially the second system is important for financial decisions. So why do we react automatically to some sort of emotional stimuli? I think it is quite useful to engage now an interesting concept from ethology. A Nobel Prize winner Konrad Lorenz suggested long time ago that our cognitive perceptual categories are also adaptations to the specific environment, in the same way as the fin of a fish is adapted to water. So our cognitive systems, the way we perceive this world, is also adaptation for our specific environment. We see this world in a specific way because we are adapted to this environment. So I would just illustrate it by a couple of examples. So the shape of animal is an adaptation for the environment. As you see here, the shape of the dolphin and the shape of the shark, as well as the shape of a bird or even the shape of an airplane, is an adaptation to certain environment. We can tell a lot about the environment just by analyzing the shape of the animal, for example. So the shape of the animal depicts environment. In the same way, when we process external information, our cognitive structures are also adapted to the specific environment. And as you see, for example, in this graph, I will present you the same photo, but the photo is rotated here. So you see these two copies. And interestingly, the upper version is perceived as a depression of the surface, as a valley, and the lower version of the same photo basically is perceived as a hill. So why do you think we interpret the same photo very differently if the same photo is rotated? So upper version is clearly perceived as a valley, as a depression of the surface, and lower one as a hill, as an extension of the surface. Perhaps we interpret it differently because of the different light distribution on the surface of this photo. So our environment is a very specific environment. So normally light comes from above. So our visual system automatically recognizes the distribution of the specific distribution of the light on the surface and interpret these two versions of the same photo differently, simply because of the distribution of the light. In our environment, in our planet, light goes from above. If you would imagine another environment, another hypothetical planet, where light goes from different location, these people in this planet would interpret this picture quite differently. The same adaptations present in our brain for more complex stimuli. For example, make a look to this photo. Do you see anything unusual with this face? So perhaps, yeah, this is a face, this is a sculpture, this is a mask, and there is nothing really special about this face. But I will slightly rotate this object, and you will realize that this is the opposite side of the mask. So if I will move this mask back, you do not see that, you do not perceive this object as an opposite side of the mask. This face clearly pops out of the surface. You do not perceive this face as a depression of the surface. So we have a clear illusion that face is normal. So our brain automatically reconstructs the normal face, and we never see in our life an inverted faces. So our brain automatically reconstructs the normal face. And simply because we live for thousands, millions of years in social groups and we are surrounded by faces. So our brain is adapted for faces, and our brain contains specific face-related areas that are automatically reconstructing objects into normal faces. So we do not see an inverted face, we see a normal face, and that's why we do have an innate mechanism to process certain information. And the same idea can be applied for emotional stimuli. So now I would mention another theory suggested by ethologists, by Konrad Lorenz and Nicholas Tinbergen, suggested that specific reactions can be triggered by specific stimuli. So they call it this hypothesis innate releasing mechanism. So particular behavior can be stimulated or released by specific stimuli. So they suggested that our nervous system works as a filter that filter important relevant information that can trigger or release specific behavioral patterns. So innate releasing mechanism suggests that specific behavior can be elicited by specific stimuli. And surprisingly, many emotional stimuli are releasers. They automatically release our reactions, and they automatically release also emotional reactions. So here you see an example. So here etologists try to select a particular sound that is attractive for female insect. So he checked different versions of the sound, and finally he detected the releaser, the emotional stimulus that triggers sexual behavior. So with this sound, the researcher was able to attract female insect. So this is an example of the releasing mechanism. The specific stimulus can trigger specific behavioral reaction. And in this case, this is a specific emotional stimulus that triggers the specific emotional reaction of sexual behavior. So there are famous examples illustrating that our nervous system is tuned to some objects. So here, a bird is offered by different versions of eggs. So one of these eggs is a natural egg for this bird. Others are various versions of the egg. So scientists can investigate how specific is the releaser. Can we cheat people by modulation of the releasers, by modulation of different stimuli of different objects? So here you see a famous example. A gull is offered by the normal egg and hyper egg. This egg is much larger than the normal egg. So here scientists try to create a hyper releaser, hyper emotional stimulus that kind of imitates the releaser, imitates the natural emotional signal, and hyper emphasize some of the features. So what do you think would be the decision of the gull? Whether it will select the normal, smaller egg, or it will sit on a larger version, on the hyper version of the egg? So in reality, it selected the hyper stimulus. Why? Because this hyper stimulus imitates and hyper-emphasizes emotional features of the objects. And it triggers very effectively an automatic emotional parental behavior of this bird. So we actually face the same hyper-releasers in our life. So for example, here you see on the top of the picture a normal shape of the baby's head. And this shape is quite pleasant to many of us. But artificially, you can create a hyper-releaser. You can hyper-emphasize some of the aspects of this face. You can create a larger head, and this hyper-releaser will trigger our positive emotions much more effectively. So we can create hyper-releaser, hyper-emotional stimuli also for us. And this idea is used by, for example, toy manufacturers. Yes, they produce toys, and we perceive them as very pleasant, very emotional, simply because toys, they imitate natural emotional stimuli, and some of the aspects of this natural emotional stimuli are hyper-emphasized in order to create a hyper-releaser, in order to stimulate certain behavioral patterns. So here you see an illustration that we normally react quite positively to babies, to young animals, and also to toys. And toys simply are imitating natural emotional stimuli, creating hyper-releasers, hyper-emotional stimuli. So interestingly, if we will make a look to cartoons, we will find different, very successful characters that actually have very childish appearance. They imitate children. They have specific shape that triggers positive emotions. If we will make a look to the evolution of Mickey Mouse over their few decades, we will find that Mickey Mouse became more and more child in appearance. So his head became larger and larger, more and more successful in triggering our emotions. So now Mickey Mouse is a kind of a hyper-releaser evoking our emotions. So what do we see here? That our specific emotions and our specific reactions can be triggered by very specific stimuli. So some stimuli surrounding us have innate emotional meaning.